The second placeholder will say interview number 1, Nina's story, stigma, culture, and disability. The video will show a photo of Nina Putasak, who identifies as Asian American, with the pronouns she, her, hers. Nina has long hair and is wearing a striped sweater and white blouse and is seated in an atrium.
Nina, I would really like to welcome you today to our Global Accessibility Awareness Day event on race and disability. Thank you for taking time to be part of this discussion.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you would introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a bit about you.
Sure, I'm Nina. I have a visual impairment, and growing up, it was something that was new, like in my culture. It's not something that happens often, and just trying to balance life as an Asian person as well as living in the bigger society, trying to figure out what's appropriate and how to kind of act and address certain situations, and kind of learning to adapt and accommodate with my surroundings. And
what generation are you? In first generation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have people in your extended family household that immigrated here.
Yes.
Okay, all right. And what do you do for work? And you are one of our lead testers, but you also have another interesting job.
I do. I am a project coordinator for NICA Creative, a brand development agency in Minneapolis. And I've been doing that for, I think, almost 6 years now.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because NICA is a company that our company has worked with, and Nina actually got her job with NICA because the founder and I work together. And so it's an inclusivity marketing firm, and it's an interesting story in and of itself, and how you landed a job with them, which we'll probably get into a little bit later. But I think that background's important. So one thing that I was struck by, Nina, when we were doing the interview preparation discussions, was that you were of our planning group, you were the one person who brought up stigma first, and what it was like growing up in your family culture as a first generation Asian American with blindness. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. I grew up believing that having a disability is something you keep to yourself. It's not something you talk about. It's a personal and private matter. So once my disability started to manifest itself, I kind of struggled of how to communicate my needs without being too obvious to other people, because I didn't want to be different. I wanted to blend in with everyone else, and I didn't want people to view me as being different from anyone else. So trying to balance out my family's beliefs and life at school and with my friends, kind of trying to figure out, what's the best way to kind of succeed without what's the word I'm looking for? Compromising what my family's beliefs are, and then my own success in life. So I tried to keep it a secret as long as I could. I didn't want to be different either, and I was afraid if I showed any signs of being different that people would start to view me differently, and maybe not want to associate themselves with me because I was different. So I could only put up with it for so long, because as my vision started to get worse, it kind of I just had to find a way to tell people, what my needs are, because there just wasn't a way to keep it up anymore. And by hiding it, I realized that I was suffering both academically and socially, because people didn't know what was going on with me.
So you became blind when you were a young teenager, correct?
Correct. And it was gradual. So when it first happened, I was able to kind of shrug it off, and nobody really noticed because I still had some vision left.
Mhm.
But as it progressed, it kind of started to impact my life more and more.
So you talk about belief system that your family had around your disability. Could you talk a little bit, describe that to us, what that was like, what it is like?
Yeah. For the most part, my family, they were they sheltered me a lot because, being females, they just felt like they had to protect me and my sisters, and adding a disability on top of it, they just were afraid that if anyone knew about it, it would put me in a more vulnerable situation, in a more dangerous situation, and they didn't want to have me to go through that. So by keeping it private as long as possible, they felt that that was the better option, because they would keep me safe and people wouldn't start to target in on me, and I wouldn't stand out, and they just wanted me to be like everyone else.
Kelly, so there was a sense that your family really wanted to protect you
Mm-hmm.
from people's unkindness.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that comes to mind, of course, for many of us, no doubt a lot of people listening to our event today will be, you're an Asian American. There's a lot that is coming to the surface about violence against Asian Americans. And personally, I believe that was there before the global pandemic. Was there a safety factor that was part of that, or is there now? Is that something you talk about? Your family says we don't want you at bus stops alone, things like that, or?
They still are protective, but it's just not for a specific reason. Like, they've always been that way, like regardless of what the world is like, they're always going to say they don't want me somewhere alone. They're, someone always needs to be with me, and they just want to make sure that I'm always safe and protected. So regardless of if there's some crimes, or even if the world is a perfect place, there's always going to be that level of fear and protection.
Which is understandable. And as your employer and the employer of many people at WeCo, I have thought about that more than once when people have limited mobility, are not sighted, and I see them waiting at a bus stop by our office. I think about that too. But it's interesting. Do you feel that there is any kind of a cultural difference being Asian American and feeling the need to protect you than if you were not a person of color, or not have a reference point for that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if everyone in the Asian culture feels the same way, but I definitely noticed that with the non-Asian cultures, there's definitely more lenience and flexibility. Like, I see more people being independent and doing things on their own that, I would never consider doing. Such as, I still don't like to go on city buses by myself, or, go on trains by myself, or even cross the street, because there's just always that level of fear. But I see other people do it all the time.
So that leads to a next natural question, is that how do you think that stigma and culture impacted your decisions about what you wanted to do with your life, career decisions, education decisions?
I definitely wanted, something that I would be comfortable doing. Like, ideally, if there was a work at home forever permanent situation, that's something that my parents definitely would prefer, rather than having me go out and, take metro mobility or other public transportation. But I think as time went on and they kind of realized that there are opportunities for people with disabilities, and there are people who care and look out for the well-being of people with disabilities, they kind of opened up to the resources and opportunities that were available. And, you know, they were willing to be more open and branch out.
So it was something that you kind of had to work with to reassure them. But it sounds like you made some choices. I know how you came to us early on was through the GAAD work from home program, where we received many of our early candidates. But you feel that this is something that you had to kind of work with your parents, extended family, immediate family, to get them to relax a little bit more so that you could spread your wings.
Right, kind of just give them the reassurance that, you know, everything was going to be okay and that they didn't have as much to worry about as they thought.
All right. So did this impact your education in any way? How you chose where to go to school, where you applied for jobs?
It definitely impacted me academically, because at first I was hesitant myself to utilize the resources and opportunities that were given to me, because I knew if I accepted those resources that my classmates and everyone else would see me doing something differently. And that was one of my biggest fears, was just standing out and being different. So I didn't want to do anything different than anyone else, which caused me to struggle in school, because as my vision got worse, I couldn't read and I wasn't able to do tests as well as I used to. And one moment that kind of did it for me was that one of my teachers actually came up to me and said, you know, you do well on all your homework assignments, but come test time, you know, it's just the total opposite. Like, what's going on? Because we know you can do this and we know that you understand the concepts. And that's when I kind of just had to be upfront and say, I can't see, you know, I'm not able to read the material anymore. And most of the time I'm just guessing on the tests, because with the homework assignments, I can bring them home and then my sisters could help me. They could read it to me and I can, you know, make accommodations for myself. But then during class time, I don't have any of that extra help. And so I just struggled through it on my own.
So you were really keeping your cards close to your chest, and that your teachers were not even aware.
Yeah. I didn't want to talk about it at all.
Interesting.
The video shows a placeholder slide with multicolor circles in a grid that says race and disability, stigma, culture, and resources. Open discussion. The floor is now going to be open to the audience. While everyone is unmuting themselves, you can also put it in the chat box. I do see that we do not have any questions in the chat box currently. And Paul, I have asked you to unmute. You are unmuted.
Right.
So it's always a little uncomfortable when we do these things online, but Nina was not able to be with us today, nor was Jess, our second interviewee, but Paul and I are available. I as the interviewee and Paul, who's more of an SME on the subject today, are available. And we would just like to have your thoughts. Was there anything that you discovered from Nina's interview that was surprising to you? Was there anything that confirmed any suspicions? Are you a person of color, and did any of this ring true for you? A couple of questions that Paul and I came up with is the concept of hiding a disability for safety or acceptance something that you've considered? And moderator, you can go ahead and break in with the chat box comments if you would like.
Sure, there was a comment from a participant that states the impact of her family culture on how she dealt with the stigma.
That was a surprise. Yes. And I have to say that as an employer of a group of people who live with disabilities. It's not uncommon for people who are not of color to have families be very protective of them. But it was very interesting to hear Nina, for me personally, to hear Nina talk about how that was woven into what she felt was the culture of her community and how her family operated.
Right. And I could sort of, I got a little bit of the protectiveness, but it was more from my grandmother as it's a safety thing. But at the other hand, the rest of my family was more about get out there, you know, experience everything, be independent. You know, if I was saying I was going to hang out with my friends and I was living in Camden, I was going to Philadelphia. For those that don't know the geography, it's New Jersey and Pennsylvania. They're separated by a river. You know, I never felt that I couldn't do. So it wasn't really a cultural thing. It was just more of like my grandmother being like, I don't want you out there. But I was always, you know, I could spread my wings and fly.
We have a comment. It says, I had a conversation about making help more available and more attractive in academic settings earlier today. So it wasn't surprising that Nina mentioned this, but it definitely confirmed that asking for help is a huge hurdle for many reasons.
Is, and you'll find evidence of that, Amy, in our other two interviews today too. So absolutely. Well, a question that Paul and I thought about throwing out there was, in what ways would your life have been different if you couldn't ask for what you need to get through school or to perform at a job? And we may have people in the audience that have had that experience.
We have Julie says that she was struck by that too. Makes me wonder how many students with less visible disabilities are struggling academically.
Yes. And I think that that is one thing that Jess Day is going to dissect in her interview that will be really, really revealing, kind of opening up that world of what that struggle is like.
This is Sue-Ann Rodriguez, and I'm sorry that my name is so messed up in the participants list, but I am a employee of WeCo, and I'm blind like Nina. I had a vision and started to lose the majority of it as a teenager as well. And actually, I wanted to be treated as normally as possible too, so I can completely relate to what she was talking about. But it came to the point where I was unable to, quote unquote, hide my disability anymore. And it came to the point where I had to adjust and determine what my needs were. And thankfully I had a really supportive family and attended a really supportive high school that offered me such great accommodations and alternative options.
Thanks for sharing that, Sue-Ann.
Yes.
We did have another comment come through. Says it struck me how Nina, from the information she provided us, has 3 different intersections of stigma affecting her. Gender, disability, and race are factors in something as simple as waiting for a bus.
Yes, that's very beautifully put. Agreed. It looks like we have Maureen with her hand up.
Yep. Maureen?
She's muted.
Maureen, you're going to have to unmute yourself, unfortunately. There you go.
Okay. I think how you identify yourself has a lot to do about how to ask for help or whatever, because I was legally blind and I had this terrible time not knowing how to refer to myself. If I referred to myself as a blind person, then people would want to give me a different kind of help that I didn't necessarily need because I had some vision. Or if I referred to myself as someone that had some vision, then they gave me a different kind of help that I'd need, you know, at times, like say if I was outside and it was at night, where I was really more like a blind person. And so it was really hard to ask for help because I didn't know how to untangle what kind of help I needed.
It's
I
interesting.
can definitely relate to that. And I'll use an example. When you travel going to the airport and you'll tell them that, you know, I need help. I'm a person with a disability, and you get there and they're there with the wheelchair for you. And I'm like, no, I can walk. All I really need is just a guide, you know, an arm, and that's it. And there's times where you had to like fight them there at, you know, on the gangplank there with you, like, no, get in this chair. Like, "No, I'm not getting in that chair. I mean, you could put my carry-on in there if you want, and I walk alongside the chair, but I I don't need it, you know." So yeah, getting help and getting the right help sometimes is a tricky situation.
We have another comment in the chat box. It says, "Hi, Deb here from First Peoples Disability Network Australia, the Aboriginal peak body for people with disabilities. And we advocate for our mob living with disabilities. I would have to say that it is hard enough being Aboriginal as we don't recognize disability as a community. However, we are affected greatly by the government system, coupled by stigma and hidden reverse racism. And to identify with disability on top leaves us with complete disadvantage. So we often don't identify. It's hard when you are identified by your disability and not as a person."
Deb, thank you for sharing that. And that is exactly why we constructed the event. The event actually was constructed out of me wondering for the past 10 years why I cannot find more. All of our candidates that work on accessibility are required to live with a disability as a legal bona fide. It's a prerequisite for the job. And it's just been very difficult to find candidates of color. And that was precisely why we asked the question. And that is what we have had. The answers coming back, and how difficult it is when you're already in a system that doesn't recognize you as a person, to add another layer to that in which you may be disadvantaged.
We have one more comment and then we are at time to start our next interview. So we have, "I'm white and a non-binary and found familiarity between wanting to fit in with others and hide her situation beyond the point that it became difficult to function to my experience in the world. I found that surprising, even though rereading what I wrote and from experience with my mom's disabilities, I probably shouldn't have been surprised."